5, 4, engine ignition, 2, 1, 0. Release and liftoff. As the countdown to Mars continues, the perseverance of humanity launching the next generation of robotic explorers to the Red Planet.
If all goes according to plan, plenty of eyes will be on Mars on February 18th, the day NASA's Mars 2020 mission is set to touch down on the Red Planet's surface.
It's a really neat mission. The goal is to search for signs of ancient life. So it's gonna go around the surface of Mars and look for any signs of microbial life. And on top of that, it's bringing with it a helicopter. And so trying to do that on Mars, where the atmosphere is 1% of that of Earth, is just outstanding. And so there's a number of really exciting aspects of this mission.
So there's no shortage of reasons to get your nerd on. For a small team of researchers at the University of Michigan, those things are secondary.
So what we're interested in is none of that.
For these engineers, it's all about one aspect of the mission, the landing.
We're interested in those couple seconds right before and during landing. Right now we have a sort of a Zoom call with my research group planned. I have some colleagues at NASA and JPL that I'm sure I'll be, texting with, and it's convenient. It's landing at 3 p.m. I mean, come on, this thing's been traveling for 7 months.
That's Jesse Capecelatro, an assistant professor of mechanical engineering for the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. He's a researcher with a particularly keen attention to detail, specializing in what he calls messy turbulent flows. He focuses on how the tiniest particles move and collide with each other in large numbers, and his work caught NASA's attention. My name is Jim Lynch with the University of Michigan's College of Engineering, and I tell stories about the research that goes on here. Late in 2019, just months before the U.S. plunged into full-on COVID-19 life, NASA tapped Capecelatro and his team to help study the particles that are stirred by the landing of a spacecraft. The rockets that fire on a typical spacecraft landing kick thousands of tiny surface particles into motion. And those particles can create trouble for any multi-million-dollar craft, even under the best of circumstances.
Anytime you take a spacecraft and it's coming down towards Mars or any planet, it needs to slow down. And how do you do that in a way that makes sure that the spacecraft doesn't get damaged and it ensures safety of everything on board is actually a really hard problem. And so the purpose of what we're doing is looking at when that spacecraft's approaching the surface and you have these exhaust plumes, these jets that are firing, how big of the crater is formed during that. And why do we care about that? Well, as that crater gets formed, it's kicking up ejected particles and regolith. And that can damage the spacecraft and just make landing very difficult. So that's why this particular mission is using the sky crane technology. So the idea is it's going to hover way above and then lower it to the surface. So you'll still have plume surface interactions, but it's really avoiding getting the exhaust plume super, super close. But we have to deal with that for future missions. When there's return missions, the spacecrafts have to take off from the surface of Mars, and there's no avoiding it there. And if we want to go towards crewed missions, sending people to Mars, then we can't rely, my understanding is we can't rely on the sky crane technology, and so we have to figure it out.
For the Mars 2020 space mission and other landings scheduled over the next few years, the University of Michigan crew will collect data and create physics-based models that can be incorporated into codes used by NASA. They'll help predict what happens when a spacecraft attempts to land millions of miles from home. Getting drafted by the world's preeminent space agency is a coup for any researcher, particularly one as young as Capecelatro, who's 34. But the turbulence of 2020 provided him a variety of opportunities to put his expertise to work in unexpected ways. Officials at the University of Michigan's College of Engineering put him right in the middle of efforts to understand the spread of COVID-19 particles in a variety of situations. Working alongside doctors, nurses, other engineers, and administrators, Capecelatro's work helped contribute to our understanding of how COVID-19 can spread in hospital settings and on public transportation. It's research that resulted in real-world changes like bus route optimization to limit risk among passengers. Jesse's story is a good one. With the Mars 2020 landing date quickly approaching, he was kind enough to talk with us about his work for NASA, as well as those unexpected research detours. Good to see you, my man. 2020 was crazy for you. Crazy for everyone, no doubt, but you were very, very busy. For people who don't know about your work, can you explain what you focus on and how you study?
Right, yeah, so I'm very much a fluid dynamicist, so I study the way things flow, is how I like to describe it, but more specifically, I tend to look at applications with particles and droplets. So we do stuff with sprays, so this might be like fuel injection type of systems. We look at environmental flows, so atmospheric clouds, so things where you have particles or droplets and flow. And we tackle this from a computational perspective. So we do a lot of writing algorithms and code in order to send, and we send them over to supercomputers to crunch the numbers, and then we get the data back and try to analyze it and learn something new from that. And that's exactly what we're doing here with NASA, is trying to develop new code to understand this very challenging problem.
Well, one of the things that's always struck me about the work that you do, and this is coming from someone who is very much less detail-oriented than you are, is how far down you drill on the specifics. You know, simulating an army of particles and projecting each of their movements and collisions. Is there something about your personality or skill set that lends itself to this kind of precision work? Were you some sort of strange child growing up?
I was by no means a strange child. Most of my childhood was riding BMX and wrestling, so I don't know how that translated. But when I was in sixth grade is when I started getting into designing websites, HTML. This is like, late 90s. And I was fascinated by the way you can write a command, and then what it shows you is, you could write a command and it'll make an image come up, or you write a command and it does something, right? And something about that I was drawn to. And so I'd say it was sort of website creation was something that drew me into, it was my gateway to writing code. And now, the idea that we understand the physical laws that describe the natural world is fascinating to me, right? The fact that it's like predicting the future. I know a set of equations that's going to explain what will happen as long as I can properly describe what those initial conditions are, and I know what those equations are. Then I can figure out what's going to happen in the future. And the brilliant thing with fluid mechanics is we know those equations. We know how to describe how things flow. The challenge is we just don't have, for the most part, computers big enough to solve those equations, right? And so now what do you do with that? Some people try to simplify the equations and be able to solve very big problems with with a bunch of simplifying assumptions. Or alternatively, you can try to solve those equations that you trust, but in a way where you use very, very large computers to crunch those numbers. And in that way, you can safely rely on the solutions you get. And I think there's a beauty to that, really. We're just very simple laws of nature. Mass is conserved, momentum is conserved, can give us really an understanding of a very complex phenomenon.
Well, it's all brought you here. So tell me a little bit about what you and the research team are going to be looking to learn from February 18th when Mars Perseverance lander sets down. What sort of data will you eventually get from this landing, and what do you do with it?
Yeah, so a lot of the data or the instruments that the rover is equipped with is specifically designed for imaging and sensing. There's microphones, there's cameras, there's all sorts of equipment for the last couple seconds, essentially, when the spacecraft enters the atmosphere of Mars and lands. And we want to get some sense of how fast is the ejected particles moving, what direction, what kind of impact does it have. I do want to preface that they're using a sky crane technology, so the exhaust plumes aren't getting too close to the surface. But it's still going to get close enough that it's going to lead to quite a bit of ejecta. that's why these problems that we're saying, the exhaust plume interacting with the surface is it's likely not going to be a big problem. I'd probably just jinx NASA, so I'll knock on wood somewhere for this mission. But for return missions and future missions where they have to take off from the surface, this is very much an unsolved problem.
We mentioned earlier about the data that's involved here. Were you surprised at, having talked to you about this before, were you surprised at how little data has been collected previously? Or I think you've mentioned like there is a bit of data from previous launches, but they're all extremely old. The landing data that we have seems very, very old. Isn't it Apollo era? Is that right?
Yeah, so, every mission since the Apollo era, there's been data collected, right? But when it comes to useful data during a landing event, it's just a hard problem. And a lot of that data, you have to say, okay, if I have these rocket exhaust plumes and I'm entering at this speed, can I get an idea of what size crater is going to form, or certain characteristics of what to expect during landing? A lot of that I've learned is indeed informed by Apollo era missions, and that was of course extremely surprising because it's the 21st century. I think what it shows is not that NASA needs more data. It's that data we need is very, very difficult to get. And it further motivates why we need reliable computational simulations of these events, because the data that we are able to get is just not enough. And so I think it just really motivates the computational side of things.
Well, it's more than just a theoretical exercise, right? You had mentioned to me in the past that there's at least one previous mission that was sort of hindered by damage sustained during the landing process. Can you fill me in a little on that?
Yeah, I believe a wind sensor was damaged on Curiosity. This is not like an Order 7 effect. This is really an Order 1 problem. And I think everyone has on their mind these days what SpaceX is doing, right? And we know very much they want to go to Mars. And I believe this is a problem that they're facing as well. And my understanding is that they don't know how to deal with this problem. They've essentially given up on it and said, we're just going to land on a landing pad on Mars. So I have no idea how they're going to do that. But it's to tell you, this is a real problem and we don't have it figured out. And so, we could do things with sky cranes and lower it to the surface. But if we ever want to send crewed missions, send people to Mars, and we're going to have larger spacecrafts, or for these missions in the next couple of years where we're taking off, return missions, taking off from the surface, we need to figure it out, and we need to figure it out soon.
One of the things that you've always said is, things change when you start talking about manned missions. So it becomes, heightens the importance somewhat. I guess in recent years, the conversation has sort of ratcheted up in intensity with regard to crewed missions. It's time to get man back on the moon, or who's going to be the first to put people on Mars. That seems to be a higher priority. Does that lend some sort of additional weight to this particular research? The work you're doing with landings, though, does have the potential to save lives if we're talking about a future of many more crewed missions, right?
Yeah, there's always going to be uncertainty with future missions. I mean, you have a new administration comes in and things change all the time. But I think it's pretty certain that there's going to be either the moon or Mars or both. In the not too distant future, there's going to be men and women being sent to these places, right? And I could say with fairly high confidence, it's probably going to happen. So there's been a lot of talk about sending the first female to the moon. I mentioned that to my 4-year-old daughter, and she was astonished that no girls have been to the moon, but boys have. And so she tells me almost every day that when she turns 9, she's going to the moon. But it's on people's minds. It's on her mind because I talk about this stuff, but I'm sure it's on many people's minds. The difference between working on a problem that's more theoretical and then working on something like this is that we know that this is going to be a challenge for a number of missions that are going to happen over the next 2 decades. I mean, there's a number of planned missions for the next 10, 20 years. Many of them involve return missions where you have to take off from the planet. Many of them are going to involve larger spacecrafts approaching, during landing, and so this problem is just going to be amplified. And so, I could tell you, working with folks at NASA, it's very, it's on people's minds, right? We need to be past this because, it's very apparent that this is going to be relevant, super relevant, very soon to a number of missions.
We'll come back to the Mars 2020 project in a second, but I wanted to talk a bit about the work you did last year that was related to the spread of COVID-19.
Oh, yeah.
In retrospect, your specialty seems like an obvious match for those health studies that you collaborated on. You were involved in a couple different projects that focused on the spread of COVID-19. Can you walk me back and tell me how all that came about?
There's a single email that was sent out. It might have been before or after Seattle started getting some cases out. But it was around there, and they were basically saying, can engineers help? And I looked at this email. The way it works in academia is you get funding for a project, you spend a couple of years on it, you write a couple of journal papers, it takes some years to get out, and a couple of people in your area read it, maybe, right? Which I'm content with. I'm fine with that. But I saw this, and it looked like a fluid dynamics problem to me, and it looked like an important one. And I thought, like, if my work is ever going to have actual, I think my work has real world impact, but I meant like immediate sort of impact. If there's ever a way I could help with fast turnaround in a way that I thought was meaningful, this was really it. So what I did from that email, I reached out to my fluids colleagues and said, hey, let's set up a meeting and think about how we can address this. So we did, and we quickly realized we're just a bunch of fluid dynamicists. We don't know anything about the medical side. And so we set up another meeting with folks from the hospital and went from there. And it quickly became apparent that wasn't going to be the only problem. And so this task force was born. The idea was to get rapid responses from the Michigan health system. They would identify what their needs were. And then myself and others would act as a conduit between the College of Engineering and the health system to try to find the right people, the right expertise to address these problems.
You were also involved in studying the spread of airborne particles on University of Michigan's blue buses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And also you were roped into doing some research over at the School of Dentistry, how particles moved inside the clinics over there. It's a space where the dentists get training, and also patients come in for care. So in both cases, that work led to a series of recommendations for best practices that the university has taken and run with. Tell me a little bit about some of the findings that you guys had for those environments and what the recommendations were.
Yeah, so these were projects where we had both looking at these problems experimentally, where we would try to replicate a kind of realistic scenario. So we had fog machines on buses, and we were measuring the concentration and the duration of the aerosols that were produced, and then actually driving the buses. And then at the same time, we were working with Professor Kevin Mackey doing computational simulations. And so it was a truly collaborative and multidisciplinary efforts where we're trying to use both to get as much information as possible. And so, for example, with the bus, what we found was based on just the volume of the bus and the conditions in which the intake in the back of the bus was operating. So there's a heating and ventilation on the bus. If someone on the bus were to cough or sneeze, I believe in about 40 to 45 seconds, everyone on the bus is breathing in a portion of that. And that's just simple, very simple fluid dynamics. The fact that just based on the airflow from the ventilation. So luckily, you're breathing in a very small portion of that. But what we wanted to do is be able to translate that to risk, right? And so, based on what was known from the literature, right, this is still a very novel virus. There's still a lot that's not known. But when we were doing this a couple months ago, even less was known, right? It's something new is being learned every day. We took the most conservative metrics, and we basically said, how can we operate in a way that will guarantee the minimal risk? And on the bus, what that meant was limiting the duration of each trip to less than 15 minutes and having windows open. Windows open is huge because that's going to dilute the concentration, that's going to bring in fresh air. And what we found was probably not surprising. The most effective measure you can take is wear a mask. I think every study I've seen kind of shows that wearing a mask is the best thing you could do. And then after that, shortly after that is opening windows and bringing in fresh air. And so what happened was the bus routes were completely redone so that they moved to this sort of hub and spoke model to ensure that every trip was less than 15 minutes. And the bus windows were kept open and passengers have to wear masks. And I believe it's been quite successful so far. It's a little challenging now with the winter and the cold weather. It puts a lot of strain and stress on the buses themselves. But, we kind of went, there's a lot of uncertainty. So can we make very conservative estimates to guarantee that, as best we can, that there's going to be very low risk. So that was the bus.
Yeah, give me a quick rundown on the dental clinic too.
Yeah, so with the dental clinic, anytime that you have multiple people in indoor spaces, that's like worst case scenario. That's where most of these spreading events are taking place. But now put on top of that these different dental procedures that generate aerosols. So high-speed drilling generates a ton of particles. So this is just it just becomes even more challenging to ensure that no one's going to get transmit the disease. So Margaret Wooldridge and Andre they did fantastic work looking at high-speed imaging during drilling to see how much was being produced, where does it go. And then we also, on top of that, had computational fluid dynamics to look at when these particles are produced, where do they go? And so where should the operations take place? How should we stagger them in a way that will make sure that when these aerosols are produced, they're not going to float around and spread to anybody else?
What do you feel like we haven't given you a chance to talk about?
It's just exciting, working on a project that's a large part of the country is going to be watching this event happening, and to think that, we're working with some of the folks that have been directly, responsible for making this happen and working on a project so future missions can actually happen. So I think it's just been fun. It's been exciting, and I love it because it's an excuse to do fundamental fluid dynamics research, right, and get paid for it and train students, but at the same time actually be able to communicate with the broader public. This is what I do. And so just last week I did this outreach program with a bunch of middle schoolers, and I was talking about COVID-19 and Mars 2020. And it's just the perfect way to engage with children and adolescents. And, the responses were fantastic. And, I was getting, people were telling me fluid dynamics is awesome. I was showing them slow motion videos of people sneezing. You're not going to get someone's attention more than that.
Well, I'm sure you hear that all the time about fluid dynamics.
Yeah, everywhere I go.
You chose it though because you wanted some variety. Did you ever think that it would include this wide array of topics all in such a short period of time?
No. I mean, I wasn't anticipating that. And for a lot of my career, I've been looking at, particles and flow, and it's usually motivated by the energy sector, fluidized bed reactors. So if you want to convert fossil fuels or biofuels into energy, it's done in this environment where the flow is turbulent and there's particulates, and that's been great. So I've been developing a lot of tools to tackle that. But using those same tools now to look at Mars 2020, I mean, it's just been a lot of fun, and it's a great motivation for my students as well. With COVID-19, it's just there's a lot of things that are just very difficult, right? And my postdoc that I hired for this NASA project joined last March, and I haven't met him yet. We've talked online, but we haven't physically met. And there's a lot of things about this pandemic that's just it's just really hard to get through, and people are going to be analyzing this time for years to come. But at least having the opportunity to sort of collaborate with folks at Michigan I haven't collaborated with, and look at these new problems has definitely been one positive thing to come out of it, I would say, for me.